Chapter 5. Fools rush in, but I can't help falling in love with you. Is that what we're doing right now? Is that what we're doing today? I'm excited. It wasn't that tiring a day, not physically. I'd done little more than sit down for a while, then walk for a while. But I was mentally tired. I thought it was less from the meeting itself than it was from the thought of it being my first assignment. The stress. The mixed feelings about it all. Vaughn was right that it affected me more than I expected. All through writing the report, I kept turning the situation on Nutera around in my head, feeling frustrated on their behalf, but knowing I could do nothing about it. Then, through changing and showering, I kept trying to push it away, only for it to resurface again. I thought about Ari's insistence we shouldn't get emotionally involved. I still couldn't agree with it. The way I was right now was proof it wasn't possible to stay so detached. And yet I could understand it now, seeing how much my mind just would not let go of it and kept brooding on the situation. The frustration of being able to do nothing else but watch from the sidelines. It was almost more stressful than sitting in that meeting while they argued. I wished I could turn the feelings off just like that. It was impossible for me, though. I shut the water off and stood there dripping for a moment. My big fear, the one thing troubling me most, was getting used to this. Getting used to the assignments. Getting used to being here. Accepting it. Actually learning to detach myself and be unbothered by all this. Maybe that was what I was moping about the most. I huffed a long sigh, wrenching my thoughts from the meeting. Enough! I hissed the word to myself as if it would help. But if I wasn't thinking about the situation with the nanite surges and the dilapidated station and relocation issues, my mind immediately went to you. I imagine it wasn't that common that we'd see each other on assignments from now on. He only went because of the medical issue in Antrim. As I worked the towel through my wet hair, a frown crossed my face. As much as the situation there bothered me, it must bother him more considering he was from there. And still had connections. He was obviously close to Roan, and he didn't like Cowrie at all. Or Ventus, from the feeling I got. I could understand why. If they were experimenting on people, and creating people in labs, as Roan indicated. For someone like you, that had to be the absolute worst, given... I stopped mid-thought, and my brain went numb as realization hit me. My stomach twisted. It couldn't be that you and Roan knew each other because of that, right? I mean, that was kind of the impression I got when... Was it you or Roan who said that those who've been experimented on, or those who want to leave to go to Arcalis, are injected against, like, without their knowledge? So that would make me think that YUU was experimented on, which might be why his Psi is a little bit different as well because of that. I don't know, though. I didn't want to say it last episode in case I was completely reaching, but maybe Morgan's come to the same conclusion. YUU had never said anything like that, and I knew it was something I could never ask him. But he didn't have family. He had abnormal Psi. That would be so awful. And it would make all of this so much more significant for him. I shouldn't assume, though. There was still a high possibility I was jumping to conclusions. That's what I felt like, too. In any case, if our relationship continued to get closer, then he'd tell me more about himself anyway. That sick feeling in my stomach was replaced by fluttering warmth, and a tremor of anxiety. On one hand, I was telling myself not to get used to assignments or accept my place here. And yet I was already getting attached to some of the people. That was a frustrating contradiction. One that I knew I would not do anything about because that meant pushing people away. Pushing you away. And I didn't want to. Meh. I made a soft noise of annoyance as I retreated to my bedroom to dress and get ready for dinner. Enough stupid thoughts. I made myself focus on getting ready and nothing else for a while. And here I thought you never talked about work after hours. I grinned at YUU over the rim of my glass as he leaned back and gave me an easy smile.
I usually do not. However, in spite of my personal preference, I'm well aware there are times that it's necessary to discuss things with those in one's social orbit. To mentally work through them, to process them on an emotional level. Rigid adherence to a preference for the mere sake of it is almost never wise. I appreciate determination as a general quality in others. You are headstrong as well, which is of course part of why I enjoy your company. However, there are times everyone is required to show flexibility. This is one of them.
Are you giving me hints for later in your route, YUU? If you get a flexible option at some point, you might want to consider it. I'll think about it.
While personal discussions are often fruitless when it comes to enacting actual change in a situation, they function as an important coping strategy. Hence, at times, I bend my rules.
What do you think of Ari's assessment that it's best to stay emotionally detached from assignments like this one?
To some degree, and in some situations, you must be able to pull back. At least a little. But never entirely. There is no blanket approach, so to speak. We're all different and have different levels of emotional processing. For some, emotional investment is a problem, and they should focus on removing themselves to avoid conflict. Kale is like this sometimes. For others, it's the opposite problem. They detach to the point they lose the ability to feel compassion. I believe people should be aware of themselves and approach each situation as needed. I know I'm heavily invested in New Terra, though I've not lived there for a long time, and I'm well aware that my feelings drive my responses and decisions regarding the situation. And whose side I take. Detaching is impossible for me. I can only endeavor to ensure it does not impact my ability to behave in a rational way and do my job well.
I think that's more than fair. I don't know your full history there, but I'm sure it's difficult to watch things unfold without having some kind of response.
Are you curious about my history there?
Ooh, this is great. I mean, I like this too, like when you're ready. But this affectionate one is perfect. I'm curious about you! Everything about you, boo! Of course I am. I'm curious about you in general. Everything about you. I don't think I'd be here if I wasn't.
Indeed you wouldn't. Yet I'm still pleased to hear you say it.
He shifted closer to me on the sofa, draping his arm over the back as he looked beyond me to the city outside. One of his fingers lightly traced a shallow circle on my shoulder as a thoughtful look crossed his face. Even that gentle, affectionate gesture sent a pleasant little shiver through me. Agreed, that's super cute.
I'm curious how much you were able to speculate about on your own. I did catch you observing me at several points while we were on New Terra today. I wonder what it was you observed, what your thoughts were while we were there.
Probably nothing too surprising. I just noticed that you seemed unimpressed by President Lyra in general. Not a fan. And of course, you and Rowan are close.
I don't dislike Cowrie Lyra per se. Certainly his father's administration, and by extension his father, did and oversaw terrible things. I don't mean to wear that bitterness so openly. However long it has been, visiting always seems to reopen the wound.
I don't think anyone can fault you for that.
There is always someone who can find a reason to fault regardless of circumstances.
No unreasonable.
Perhaps. I generally try to hold my tongue when I'm there to avoid confrontation, at least while in Solemn. Antrim will always be a place where I am comfortable, though.
So I was right. You lived in Antrim when you were there.
Initially I lived in Ventus, but only in one of their lab sectors, of course. Then we were moved to Solemn for a while to ensure the lab continued to exist in secrecy. And when those few subjects who survived managed to free ourselves, we hid in Antrim.
So he really was an experiment. Okay, so it wasn't just that he chose to go down to the surface. He's also an experiment.
Hui. Does the revelation I was created in a laboratory there bother you?
Not at all. I mean, if it did, I wouldn't have done Magnus's route, so it's fine. Of course not. Why would it? That's not something to be bothered by. But something about the look on his face made me suddenly uncertain. Have people been bothered by that before?
From time to time. I don't believe they intend to be. Perhaps they weren't even aware how their behavior changed when they found out. But people have unconscious biases, of course. And I suppose I am eccentric. It's not difficult for people to connect those eccentricities to my origin and believe, perhaps, that there is something inhuman about me.
I don't know how to say this politely, but I've met way more eccentric people in university. Plenty of scientists are a little on the odd side. That has nothing to do with origins, and probably more to do with lack of social lives. He chuckled softly, leaning forward a little more.
I cannot help but observe you didn't deny that I'm eccentric.
Well, I've noticed when people argue with you, you always pull out the medical degree thing.
Eccentricity is not, in and of itself, a medical diagnosis. I believe I would let it slide this time.
Then this is my observation. I think there's a difference in acknowledging that our experiences shape who we are and assuming how you were born has made you into something inhuman. That is not a fair or even a logical conclusion. And I would never allow learning something about your history make me shift away from you. I mean, I would hope that learning more about you would only help us get closer, not the opposite.
I too hope for the same thing.
So how did you end up here at Endgame?
By happenstance, really. There were agents on assignment in the lower levels, and they came across me. I had no concept of attempting to hide my abilities while trying to steal food. They noticed I was an Esper, and I was wholly incapable of going against trained agents. They caught me and brought me back. Roan did not come with me. He was not caught, and I told no one about him. We re-established contact much later.
I noticed he was an Esper as well. A rook, like you.
Ah yes, I forgot you're capable of observing that.
Their size structure was similar too, though I didn't mention that. Test tube twins? Maybe?
You're correct, of course. Roan established community and ties there, just as I've done here. He never wished to leave, and I never wished to go back. Perhaps the reason I immediately gravitated towards Caleb also had to do with having been separated from the only family I knew. Like Cale, Roan also functioned as a sort of protector for me. There was familiarity there, I think.
I hope they're able to find a solution for the problems there. And I hope you're able to find a solution to the medical issue in Antrim. I've been turning the situation over in my head since we got back. Seeing what struggles they're facing put my own problems in perspective somewhat.
That others are having significant troubles does not make your experiences invalid.
I know, but there's nothing wrong with reorienting your worldview either. That day we had the meeting about New Terra, Magnus shared some surprising things about Endgame with me while we were talking. The bitterness he has for this place somewhat makes me think of... well, when I was watching you interact with Cowrie Lyra and talk about Ventus. It was a similar vibe. You regarded me silently for a moment, eyes going far away.
I'm surprised you have picked up on that about Magnus.
He doesn't try to hide it when we're alone.
I still do not know his full situation, and he has hinted that I should not go looking, so I have not. Trauma changes people, but to undergo such a radical switch in personality, along with the short-term memory loss... I can only hypothesize about what happened, but
He shook his head.
it is not a surprise to me that he despises this place. I'm astonished he is willing to allow you to see it.
I was thinking about the changes taking place on New Terra. People learned the truth and decided they had to do something. Maybe it's not as dramatic, but Magnus wants to change things here as well. He thinks I might be able to help with that somehow, but I don't know how that's possible.
So that's what the two of you discussed.
A little.
If he wants to change things here, he should do it on his own.
He doesn't feel empowered to do it.
Which still doesn't mean he should impose that wish on you. Particularly if anything he said implies he wants the sort of revolution they instigated on New Terra.
Well, he hadn't not implied that, though I had no intention of starting an actual revolution. Historically speaking, though, sometimes change was violent. I didn't want to think Endgame needed something that drastic, though. I was startled when you poked my forehead. I caught his hand and pulled it from my face.
Something I've said has made you frown terribly.
Sorry. I've heard I do that sometimes when I'm thinking about something serious.
Of course, there is no need to apologize. However, instead of sitting here and thinking of serious things, perhaps an after-dinner walk is in order. I feel we have discussed heavy topics enough for the evening, and at least for a while, I am much more interested in seeing your lovely smile than your frown.
I'd like a walk. And a change of subject for a while. You made good on telling me more about his past. About growing up in Antrim. About coming to Endgame. He was so awed and terrified by everything he saw here. His first experience outside, he said, was strange. He was so used to an enclosed ceiling overhead that the endlessness of the sky both amazed and frightened him. It was so different listening to him talk about personal things than it was listening to his logical and thoughtful approaches to everything else. Sometimes he would pause, one finger just below his lip as he remembered. Then he would continue. His voice and expression softened in a way that made me squeeze his hand tighter for some reason. Aw. He always proved, in moments like these, how different he was from what I'd originally thought. I could listen to him talk for hours. Eventually, though, we left the garden and were walking back up to our flats.
I am tempted to invite you to my flat, but I fear it may feel as if I have ulterior motives for doing so. Yet I find I'm not quite content to end the evening yet.
I know the feeling. We stopped just in front of my door, and I leaned against the wall, smiling at him.
Oh my! How scandalous. You could always come inside for some tea.
Now, do you mean tea, or do you mean tea, Morgan? I'm looking at you, girl. I'm watching. I'm always watching. So, why don't you come to my place for a cup of tea instead?
Oh? And do you have ulterior motives for inviting me?
I guess you'll have to come inside to find out. Fingers still laced through mine, he stepped closer with a playful smile on his lips.
How can I refuse such an intriguing offer?
Technically, all you have to do is say no.
Ah, but what shall we do? I find I don't wish to say no.
Then I guess you have no choice but to accept?
It appears that you are correct.
Cuties. Laughing a little, I led him inside my flat, kicking my shoes off at the door. He paused longer to take his off and arrange them more neatly before following me inside. You can have a seat. I'll get us some tea.
These furnishings are Endgames, aren't they? You haven't done your own decorating yet.
Ah. I still feel weird about it, honestly. It doesn't quite feel like home, to be honest.
Would that not be alleviated by moving your belongings in?
I don't know about that. It feels like living in a hotel right now, and it would be strange to move your belongings into a hotel, right? I guess I still have this sense of just passing through, so it makes it difficult to want to see my things scattered around. Maybe moving my things in feels like accepting that I'll be here permanently. Like boiling the frog. If I get used to being here, I'll let them win?
Boiling a frog? Why are we boiling amphibians?
You've never heard that saying? It's a metaphor for how if a negative situation or change occurs gradually enough, you acclimate and accept it instead of trying to escape. It's based on the theory that frogs regulate body temperature in a way that if you put them in a pot of tepid water and bring it to a boil, they won't notice the danger until it's too late.
Ah, I see. I've heard this before under another name. Creepy normality. I question the veracity of suggesting an ectotherm's thermoregulation would cause them to stay in a pot of water rather than shifting locations.
Yeah, I apparently read some stuff about that, and that is not true. A frog will just realize, water's getting hot, I'm getting out of here. So you cannot slow boil a frog, is what I've read.
You, of course, are also much smarter than a mere amphibian.
I carried 2 cups of tea to the sofa, laughing. One hopes. YUU took the cup from me, inhaling the steam. I sat next to him, balancing the cup on the arm as I watched him. I admired his slender fingers as he wrapped them around the cup. He had such pretty hands. Oh girl, you are so far gone. My eyes were always drawn to them when we were around each other. He lifted the cup to take a sip, and I could tell from the look of half amusement on his face that it didn't meet his standards. I'd already known it wouldn't, but it was funny to see that I was right. Do I get a lecture about oversteeping?
I suspect the water temperature was too high, in fact. For green teas, it's preferable for the water to be below boiling, of course, so as not to scorch the leaves.
I'll remember that for next time. Despite the complaint, he drank the tea anyway before setting the cup down and shifting closer to me on the sofa.
It's unfortunate this next week will be busy, and I'm unlikely to have much free time.
I would suggest we meet for lunch, but I don't know if our schedules will align. I also get the feeling somehow that you aren't the sort to actually stop for a proper lunch in the middle of your day. His gaze slid to the side, and I couldn't help but laugh when he didn't answer. I knew it. A smirk came to his face, and the hand that he had draped over the back of the sofa found its way to my shoulder.
I'm curious if I'm that predictable in my habits, or if you've been that observant during the weeks we've known one another.
Maybe both. You do seem very focused when you work.
Hyperfocus is a side effect of my passive mental enhancements. It can be detrimental when work is the subject of that focus, but currently what I'm hyper-focused on is, of course, the woman in front of me.
Oh. That makes me a little nervous. I hope you're not sitting there counting my pores.
Of course not. Your skincare routine must be exemplary. Your complexion is lovely anyway, especially as someone who came to us with such poor nutrition and eating habits.
Please don't start on my nutrition again.
You are truly beautiful, Morgan. I do hope you realize this.
One of his fingers slipped silkily over my cheek as he spoke, and I found myself unable to meet his gaze until the same finger slid under my chin and forced me to look up at him. His thumb gently brushed my lower lip, and his eyes had gone soft with the obvious desire to kiss me. Really? Really? I was staring into his beautiful eyes, wondering if he was the sort to just lean in or to ask first. In spite of the flutters of anticipation, I suddenly wanted to tease him a little, to catch him by surprise and watch his expression when I did it. He almost definitely saw it coming because I couldn't quite keep from smiling as I leaned in without warning to kiss him first. Damn, we got a kiss! Chapter 5? Ooh! I love it. He leaned into it, a pleased murmur escaping. The only thing that would make it more perfect is if we had a CG! Pain! Pain! That's the only pain I have. When we parted, he smiled, then moved forward to kiss me again, lips soft and warm, hands gently cradling my face. Yes! He heard me!
He heard me! He heard me complain! Oh! What a kiss! What a kiss! Yay! I is happy!
We shifted towards each other a little. The first kiss was slow, experimental, like feeling out where things stood between us, where we stood with each other. His mouth opened against mine, tongue cautiously brushing my lips. I let out a sigh and responded in kind. YUU inched closer, deepening the kiss and leaving behind all hesitance as his hands moved to my back to nudge me closer to him. My body brushed against his chest, the air between us warming. My heart rate was through the roof. I wasn't expecting it to get intense so fast. There was a flicker of uncertainty that must have been apparent in the little surprised moan that escaped. YUU pulled back instantly, his dark eyes searching my face for a moment as I tried to catch my breath.
Is this too fast? I am aware that when I'm particularly interested in someone, I tend to move quickly or express myself in a particularly intense way. But if we need to progress slower, I will. I do not want you to feel overwhelmed.
I'm okay with fast. If I wasn't, I wouldn't have kissed you. He smiled and leaned forward to rest his head against mine.
I hope you are not simply being accommodating.
I laughed a little, and this time it was my turn to make him look up at me so I could kiss him again. Just a reassuring soft peck. We love a guy who checks constantly. It's just like, is this okay? Are you comfy? If you're not comfy, tell me. Don't just be like, it's okay. Man, you're great. Hardly. I'm not exactly reckless or impulsive in relationships most of the time, but sometimes there's no real reason to hold back. He wrapped his arms carefully around me.
If I ever push too hard, you will tell me, yes?
Of course I will.
Good.
It was surprising that, although it seemed like he was reassuring me, it was almost like he was seeking reassurance for himself. He gave me another kiss then. Languid, deep, mouth moving against mine and filling my head with the taste of him. Almost as if to prove he could. But it ended quickly, and he pulled me closer so we could rest against each other for a little while, his back against the arm of the sofa and my head on his shoulder. But not for too long, unfortunately. YUU finally said he needed to go, as much as he would prefer to stay. I walked into the door of my flat where we shared another brief kiss. Dang, all them smooches.
If I can find time to do so, I will try to meet for dinner in the upcoming days. If not,
I'll survive having to have dinner alone. Or, heaven help me, with Caleb and Ari.
may I ask for you to check in with me after your training session?
Of course, I will.
Good night, Morgan.
I had fun tonight. He rested a hand briefly on my cheek.
As did I.
He let himself out, and when the door shut behind him, I leaned against it, pressing the back of my hand to my mouth. I took a breath and let it out slowly as I counted to 10. Every single thought about New Terra, about Endgame and my position here, the future, all of it vanished temporarily beneath thoughts of you and how unexpectedly the evening progressed. And I was glad to let the other things go for a while. They'd still be waiting for me in the morning. But falling asleep with the memory of the way his kisses felt, the way he would lightly brush his fingertips against the side of my neck, his smile, and drowning in the euphoric giddiness of a budding romance. It was a pleasant change from going to sleep thinking about troubles and change and revolutions. I could go back to thinking about those things tomorrow.